Hey there, welcome to Classroom 5.0, a podcast helping you to design a future of learning, work, and leadership that's both personally meaningful and creates impact for a better world. I'm your host, Marianne Power, and I'm thrilled you're joining me for another episode of our Inclusive Impact series. You can expect topics and interviews that deep dive into what it takes to build a truly diverse and equitable world, and learn science-backed skills and soul-filled strategies helping our different kind of difference makers to thrive. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our homeland, Virpai Country, where this podcast was recorded, and pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. It's a pleasure and a privilege to play, live, and work on country, and I'm so glad you're here. So let's dive on in to today's episode. Camille Davey, it is so wonderful to have you here on Classroom 5.0. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna get you to introduce yourself because I feel like you are the best person to do that. But I am going to preface your introduction by sharing with our listeners today that, in my opinion, if that matters, Camille is the queen of hard conversations. And I have adored you since the minute we met all those many moons ago and your work in the mental health space. So I'm so excited for this conversation. I'm going to let you launch in and say hi to everybody listening in today. Tell us all about Camille and the incredible impact she's having in the world.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here. I have a bit of a unique background and compared to I think a lot of people in the industry, in the sense that I have what I call the triage of experience, like the three things that kind of bring me to this area. I worked in HR for many years, so I was at the front face of working with employees, leaders, helping them through like the employee life cycle. And I saw a lot of things that we did really well, and I saw things we didn't do so well from a HR, human resources perspective. I then moved into service delivery with mental health. So I've run very large programs in delivering mental health for workplaces, whether that's a program in well-being, in leadership, capability, anything, literally any topic you imagine, I've kind of been either led or been involved in developing. So I have that kind of as a professional background. I also have a academic side of me. So I did do a Bachelor of Psychology. I've got graduate diplomas in neuroscience and Psychology Advanced, and I'm currently studying a Master's of Clinical Psychology. So in the midst of that right now. But most importantly, and what I bring to everything I do, which is what also my company really lives and breathes, is the voice of lived experience. So I think we're very good at looking at theories, looking at frameworks, but I think if we don't listen to the voice of lived experience in what we do, we're kind of half doing the job that we should be doing. And as someone who is proudly someone with lived experience, I was diagnosed with multiple mental health conditions over my life, and I've navigated them in lots of different ways in the workplace and otherwise. So I bring all that together, the professional background, academic background, and most importantly, the lived experience. And I currently do a lot of speaking, a lot of designing, a lot of consulting for organizations who just want to do a better job at mental health in the workplace. No matter where you are, no matter what the maturity is of the organization, I meet you where you are, and we go from there.
You sure do. I don't know if you remember, I mean, we'd had multiple conversations, but do you remember that first time that we met in person at a cafe in Sydney?
A cafe?
Do you remember? You don't remember. Oh my gosh. And my
I
memory is
thought it
usually
was a conference. I thought it was the
No,
Thriving Serenity Collective conference.
no, that was a follow-up. So you and I, the first time we met in real life was at a cafe. We'd connected, I think maybe on LinkedIn, and I
Yeah.
had come across your work in the lived experience space of mental health. And I was like, whoa, who is this woman sharing this incredible story of her own mental health journey within the workplace in such a raw but sensible way? Let's meet. And we met in, I think it was Surrey Hills actually, and sat down, and it was a deep dive. Like we literally,
What? Oh my gosh.
oh yeah.
This is so embarrassing. I had a bad memory. So you look at
No.
any one of people who know me quite well, I have a notoriously very bad memory.
Well, you left such an impression on me that day. I remember you got out your napkin. You and I were both dreaming up what the future of mental health could look like. At the time, Posify
I
was
love that.
really concentrating on the youth space, and we've since
Yeah.
moved back into organizations as well with neurodiversity. But you were looking at how can I bring lived experience into the workforce so that people actually understand what's going on for us? Because I
Yeah.
remember you sort of mapping out this journey. Oh gosh, I wish I'd kept that
Wow.
napkin now.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other thing that you did was share with me a little bit about your personal story, and I wonder if you'd feel comfortable taking our listeners there who might not have otherwise
Yeah.
come across your work before.
Yeah, of course. You have such a good memory. There was a
Well,
period of my life where I
for
started
very
my
highlight
business.
moments, glimmers, right?
I was about probably that point, fairly early on in my business. I was very much a duck underwater, like
Yeah,
paddling
we
really
both
quickly
were.
underneath, so
We
full of
both
passion,
were.
and I just wanted to make a difference. So, much later on in my life now. But yeah, I keeping my story short, as short but meaningful as I can. Yeah, so I'm someone who's always known, I guess, what it's like to be mentally unwell in some degree, shape, or form. I was diagnosed with major depression at 16 years old. So mental health was always something I was aware of once I understood what was happening to me, and what
Mm,
I realized at one point, this doesn't happen to all teenagers. They don't all have these thoughts. They don't all have these feelings. They don't all struggle this much to get to school and to engage into the world, and all the classic kind of symptoms of depression.
mm,
Went on my way, studied psychology. I found out in my third year, I think, when I went to become a psychologist, I found out that the workplace is a major contributing factor to people's mental health. So at the
mm,
time, I thought, hey, you know what? Instead of going to become a psychologist to be the solution at the end, I'm
mm,
going to go to the workplace and go in HR, and I'm going to prevent people from getting unwell in the first place. Because if I can change the way we work workplaces, people actually may not reach the point of mental health condition. They may actually just reach out for support, put the right supports in place, and they recover while still engaging into the workplace. And that was my goal and my passion. And then I joined HR and realized that's not what it's about. HR is a very different career. It's a very different focus in some way. There's a degree of that, but it really wasn't the way HR, especially when I was in HR, which is going
at
on
the
a
time.
while ago now.
Yeah.
And times have
So just to
changed a
give
lot.
context, that was what, almost 10
Yeah,
years ago,
so
right?
at least
Because
10
you and
year,
I
10
met
years
in,
ago I
yeah,
started.
2017.
Um, yeah, so so before 2016 I was in HR already for about 6, 7 years, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was personally, even in a personal space, I was in a job that wasn't really fulfilling me. I was, just wasn't solid in my life. Like things just weren't really lining up. And for a long time, I kind of always dismissed my mental health. I thought, this is just me. This is fine. I was a perfectionist. I was always a high performer. Every team I worked for, you know, saw me as a glory child. Like I was a golden child. I was the person who went above and beyond, worked long hours. So I think for a pretty long time, people didn't see me as a mentally unwell person. They saw me as the
Mm,
person who would always be there, always saying yes. And so I masked
mm,
extremely well. And even to myself, I was so good at masking that I think for a long time I didn't realize I was unwell. Until, and hear the story so often, overnight, I woke up the next day, had a big night out the night before with some colleagues, woke up, had this massive panic attack, and it was literally like my life changed overnight. I woke up,
mm,
it was insidious and it happened progressively over time. But for me, I went from something doesn't feel right to, oh my gosh, what is this panic attack? What is happening to me? I'm not well. And I was convinced it was a physical
mm,
condition for a long time. Went to doctor after doctor after doctor, all these different diagnoses, a physical condition diagnoses. And eventually someone said to me, I think you have anxiety. And
mm,
that started this long journey of trying to understand what's anxiety, how do I get better. I was having panic attacks daily, weekly. I was losing a lot of weight. I was nauseous all the time. It's a very physical condition. I think people don't realize
mm,
how anxiety can be very physical. And so it's a misconception. It's just it is obviously a mental health condition, but it
mm.
presents in a very physical way. And I think it does for a lot of conditions we have, or even issues. I think our body tells us alarm bells before we even realize, and that's usually the first sign people feel and see when they do have something going on. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, then I went through this massive journey of recovery with the workplace. I left the workplace, went on medication. Uh, you know, without going into like heaps of detail, like I saw a psychiatrist weekly. I was seeing a psychologist weekly, and it was a 2 free year journey, sorry, that
mm,
I went through recovery. And while I was trying to stay engaged in the workplace, and each place I worked, the intentions were kind of there sometimes, but the execution just wasn't, around keeping me at work, and trying to help me. recover with the workplace. And that's when I think one day I had a job. It was a casual job while I was trying to get better after I left my substantive role in HR. I was working at a bookshop, and I remember them firing me. And because I had raised alarm bells with the pay they were giving everyone, they were underpaying people. And being from
Wow.
HR, I was just working as like a book sales attendant. But I was like, hey guys, just so you know, and I was doing it in a way of going, I'm sure you're not aware, but you just so you know, you're actually underpaying all your staff. You need to increase the
Wow.
pay, like to this uh, the minimum
Standard
rate.
amount.
And then the same day, the CEO came in and fired me from the
Wow.
bookshop. And I was so angry. I was so, and this is where you would have seen the version of me just after that, because
Right.
this is in 2017
Yeah.
or
Yeah. It
18, I think
wouldn't,
it was.
yeah, it would have been when we met that you were
Yeah,
really fired up for
I
good
was so
reason. Yeah.
angry. Yeah. So that's what
Wow.
started it. And I went home, I posted notes, went on a wall. I don't tell this story very often, actually. Went on a wall and just put up all these ideas I had around how do we change the workplace? How do we do a better job at this? Because workplaces suck. And
Yeah.
trying to help people.
Yeah.
It
And
was just,
now
yeah,
what do you, I mean, we're 10 years on. Oh, not so
yeah,
long actually, but we're a fair way on from that experience.
yeah,
What would your self back then have liked to have had differently? When I hear you say that, you know, you went into workplaces and they tried, for those who are listening and not
yeah.
watching our YouTube, I'm using my inverted commas here, but what did you want to be differently, and what do you encourage workplaces to look at these days?
Yeah, so there's so much you could do, and this is
Yeah.
the thing. When I do talk to clients, I do try and really speak to or ask understand where they're at now,
Hmm.
because in my head, I have all these different things you could do. You could look at policies, procedures, you can look at systems, you can look at the way your managers have capability, you could look at the way the
Mm,
workplace is set up, you could look at resource flexibility. There's so much you could do, but I'm so
mm,
conscious that if someone came to you and said, these are all the things you can do, you'd probably
mm,
be like, I'm not going to do any of them, because it feels too big. It feels too
mm,
hard. It's culture shift. Culture shift takes time. So,
mm,
what I usually try and say is try and understand where you're at first. Always try and look in before you try and decide what to do. I think we're very
mm,
quick at reacting to going, we've got to get yoga classes, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to like put this strategy in place. But no one actually asked the question going, what's actually wrong? No, what is the
mm,
unique challenges our employees are facing? Because a manufacturing company is going to have a very different issue to a banking finance company.
mm,
A small business is going to have a very big issue different to an enterprise business. So you're going to have very different challenges. I think if you don't understand those challenges, you're not going to do a very good job at designing a solution for it that actually solves the problem. So a
mm,
big part of what I do is encouraging workplaces to actually ask the question, what's the current status quo? Like, what are we currently doing? Do a bit of an audit. So are we doing anything in this space? Are we doing anything? What are our policies and procedures surrounding what kind of language are we using? Do we have training in place? So asking some simple questions you can ask yourself to do a bit of an audit around where your workplace is at. And then once you understand that, I'd also, definitely encourage like things like discovery processes, discovery phases, actually
mm,
asking people lived experience. And not even when I say lived experience, sometimes I just mean people who have experience of the thing you're trying to develop. So if
mm.
you're designing a workplace adjustment policy, ask the people
Mm.
with disabilities what their experiences are. Don't just make a
Yeah.
policy or procedure without asking. If you're doing a policy around flexible working, ask the people who are
Mm.
going to be using that policy what actually is important for you in this policy, this procedure, or this way of working. So if we don't ask that, the people with lived experience of the challenge we're trying to solve, we
Mm.
actually aren't going to solve the challenge. We're going to create some solution that doesn't meet the mark, and we've just wasted time, resources, and money. So,
Mm.
so I know it's a really big answer to something where, I think people would love to have a list of what do I do differently.
A
But I
checklist
think,
doesn't work.
yeah, it
Mm.
doesn't work. But I think you need to understand where you are first, and then go, okay, well, what can we do next? And how do we start small in our ability at the moment? Because not every company can go and change everything overnight. So just what
Mm.
can I do that's going to have the biggest impact right now for our people?
Yeah, absolutely. Inclusive design. I 100% agree with
Mm,
you. I have a question for you,
mm,
and it's around the challenge of disclosure. So
Mhm.
one of the questions I'm often asked when doing similar work but in the neurodiversity
Yeah.
space is, what do I do as a leader if the people in my organization aren't disclosing? And to give
Yeah.
you a really concrete example of that, so we know in the tech sector, for example, data coming out of the UK, 54% of people in the tech sector identify as neurodivergent. And
Mm.
yet, when we survey the employers, they believe that number to be 3% representation. So we're
Yeah.
talking about a massive gap between what a leader believes exists in their workplace and what is actually lived experience within the workforce.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious in terms of, I mean, I've got some ideas and opinions, and I know there's some frameworks around neurodiversity specifically on how to create psychological safety to be able to
Yeah.
facilitate disclosure, to start the conversation, to understand the lived experience. But in your work, what are you seeing works well in terms of starting that conversation and inviting in a space where people feel like they can have these difficult,
Yeah.
hard conversations?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big question. I get an awful lot around how do you create a culture of psychological safety, but also how do leaders encourage people to disclose. And I'm just going to
Mhm.
put a bit of a challenge around disclose for a second, just from a perspective of
Yeah.
that. A lot of people with lived experience don't feel like they have to be out, don't feel like they need to disclose their condition or their
Yeah.
issue. They need to disclose the functional impact it may have on their role.
Oh, that's
So I
brilliant.
think sometimes leaders think they must share with me what they have, like the
Mm.
condition, the details, when it was around, what happens. And people with lived experience say, well, actually, I shouldn't have to share that with you. For me,
Mm.
disclosure
It's
could look like,
confidential.
yeah,
Mm.
right, that's my information that I don't actually have to disclose. What I need to
Mm.
disclose with you is what the functional impact of that is on my position and if I
Mm.
need support. And that's
Mm.
really the main reason people disclose at work, is that from a point A to point B, they're sharing because they want some sort of support and understanding and perspective for the leader or the organization to respond in a way that gives them an adjustment, accommodation, even just an understanding or a bit of a, not a forgiveness, but a little bit more like a leeway of going, okay, I understand this is a need for you, that you have a later morning because for you take your meds in the morning and that's really hard. Sometimes you have an initial reaction to it, you get some nausea,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
actually, you know what I mean? It's like individual random things that you might have because of what your personal experience of life is.
If you're a leader of a business or in charge of a team of people, then chances are you're probably in the thick of getting up to speed on Australia's new psychosocial safety legislation. By law, companies now need to do what they can to protect their people against stress and burnout. But my question to you is that in creating your policies, procedures, and programs, are you accounting for the different kinds of brains in your workplace? Because stats would suggest maybe not. In the tech sector, for example, 54% of people identify as neurodivergent. And yet, when we ask employers what they think that number is, they report back 3%. Now, that gap poses a significant problem because without specialized understanding of neurodiversity, traditional policies and programs risk missing the mark, leading to higher instances of burnout, stress, and both physical and mental health challenges and outcomes for our community. But understanding neurodiversity is more than just compliance, it's also about unlocking innovation. You see, diverse companies are 70% more likely to attract new markets and 36% more profitable than homogenous ones. I personally believe that neurodivergent leaders are the different kind of difference makers that our world needs right now. That's why I'm so excited to be launching the Neuro Impact Network. We're changing the game for neurodiversity leadership and bringing both our neurodivergent leaders and allies together in a neuro-inclusive online community space where we can share science-backed strategies that support legal compliance and equip us with everything we need to be able to build neuro-inclusive workplaces. Plus, peak performance and human flourishing science strategies that ensure we thrive and protect our mental health, alongside community events so that we can truly connect and share one another's strengths, wins, and challenges along the way. Neurodivergent leaders, listen up. I really believe this is our time and our space to shine, and it's such a privilege to be welcoming you into this space. So if it sounds like something that's for you, if you're ready to say goodbye to burnout and hello to innovation that actually delivers impact, I'd love to see you on the inside. Everything you need for the applications, which are now open for founding members, are in the link below. I look forward to seeing you there.
So I think at the first and foremost, I always say you need to embed psychological safety in everything you do. So if you are a leader and you only do psychological safety in one thing, so let's say you go, I did a meeting and I asked at the end what everyone thinks. There, I did psychological safety. Now you compare that to, okay, I asked at the start, I've set up a scene to go, hey everyone, I'm really going to present an idea to you. I really would love for everyone to share their opinions as I go. And I would like you to consider, like, as you leave this meeting, what you might think about differently. Take some time to reflect on it. You're welcome to share in this meeting. You're welcome to reach out to me afterwards. We can have a phone call. We can have a meeting, a one-to-one meeting. You can send me an email. You can send me a voice memo. And there's a consideration for leader on the other side, which can come to later. But what you're doing is you're creating opportunities for different individuals to engage in different ways. Because psychological safety is an individualized thing. It is not, I've just done one thing and I've allowed people to speak. Because speaking is an only form of communication. You have speaking, and especially these days, we're in the 2024. There's 1,000 ways of different ways to communicate and share ideas. There's different ways you can facilitate that. So I think if you want to, and so when I'm saying that, it isn't about that isn't about disclosure, but what you're doing, even if it's a meeting and you're creating psychological safety in like idea generation, that sends a message. I want to hear from you.
You matter.
You matter, right? What you're sharing, you as my team members are matter in my opinion, and I want your contribution. That then translates to, I also want to hear if it's not related to the idea. It sends this message as a leader that I actually care about what you have to say. And that then people are going to feel much safer to go and say to you, actually, I need to talk to you privately because I have an issue I'm facing, or I have specific needs at the workplace that I haven't been getting and I'm actually struggling through that. But if you don't do that, if you don't set the scene across all the things that you do about asking people what they think and how they feel and all that kind of stuff, you're going to end up not creating a culture that actually does embed psychological safety. It just does it in a really small way, but you want to create a much more broader way. Other ways you can do it is, thinking about how you have ways of working. When you have a new employee come on board, do you have little get to know you cards? Do you have a way of like sharing with each other? Do you disclose as a manager and as a leader? And I know that everyone has a different opinion on this, and you don't have to, again, disclose your condition. You could just say, for me, it's really important I have to pick up my kids up at 3:00. For me, I'm going to leave work at 3 and come back afterwards because that's important for me. All you're doing is creating a message that if something's important, it's okay to communicate that. And whether that's a disclosure, whether it's a mental health condition, whether it's neurodiversity, whatever it is, you're creating a culture that it's okay to share and you won't be reprimanded as a result of doing so. So that's my few thoughts.
I want to sing like, the clouds have all opened up, because one of the things that frustrates me, and I know, you and I are kind of an example of this. A lot of these conversations are siloed in terms of their topic areas. So, we're doubling down on neurodiversity. I know you're doubling down on mental health. The two overlap and they intertwine, and that's where you and I collide together. But in organizations, I see so much of, oh, well, we don't deal with that. That's the DEI space. And we don't deal with that. That's the HR space. When actually when I'm listening to you frame things, this is about inclusion. This is about inclusive impact. And what's really interesting to me that I just want to double click on for a second is, I don't know if you've been following some of the commentary coming out of the States and the budget slashing that's happening within DEI initiatives and the justifiable outrage as a result, because we've worked so hard to build up these important conversations, and yet it seems like the rug is being pulled out. I went digging into some of the, the logic behind some of the companies' rationales, and they're publicly available, by the way, but they're proxy statements around how actually what we want to do is create an environment for inclusion. Now, just to be clear, this is different from mixing equality with equity, and that's a whole other conversation. It's not everybody's on the same place, and so everybody deserves the same thing, which I think is a valid thing to get cross and angry about. I'm talking about the idea that you've just shared is how can we start to have conversations that are nuanced and individualized,
Yeah.
that recognize everybody's unique contribution of struggles and strengths, that everybody has their own lived experience across the board as a carer,
Yeah.
with mental health, with neurodivergence, with different working styles, with different travel arrangements, with illness, like all sorts of stuff. How can we pull this together? And what I love about your work is it just gives people these scripts
Mm.
and the confidence to go, oh, I can do that. I can sit in
Yeah.
a meeting and ask those questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to applaud you for that. There's Maz's
Oh,
rant.
thank you. I always say though, when it comes to like, because people do like golden bullets and a script per se of like,
But
I
that
want
is the
A, B,
golden
C,
bullet.
D.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I've said to people about mental health conversations, and like they're always going to be awkward. Like even when I say awkward, like even when I have a conversation with someone about mental health, it's awkward because you want to help them. And it's
Yeah.
awkward because you don't know what to help them with. You don't know what to
You
do
don't know
unless they
what's
tell
going
you what to
on.
do, right? So I
Yeah.
always say, if you're uncomfortable, it's probably a good thing. 'Cause it probably means you care enough to be uncomfortable.
And it probably
If you
means you're
don't,
going to be
yeah,
open-minded and curious.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
And
yeah.
not go in
So
with bias. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
That is such a, can everyone write that down? If you're feeling uncomfortable, that's probably a good thing and a place to start. Like notice
Yeah,
that discomfort and shift
yeah.
from there and ask a question rather than make an assumption.
Oh,
That is
100%.
brilliant.
Like, yeah, I talk a lot
Yeah.
about asking questions, and I always say to people, like, it's interesting. I say a lot about being curious,
Yeah.
and people are like, well, isn't that prying? And I'm like, it's a very different thing between respectful curiosity and kindness, and
Mm.
then being prying on someone. So I
Could
think the
you
reason,
distinguish that for me? How do you see it?
yeah. Well, curiosity, I think one of the things I found when I was unwell in the workplace is that no one asked my own experience. Everyone
Mm.
made assumptions. So I had a chief medical officer working with my psychiatrist and psychologist and the HR
Wow.
director, and they were all deciding for me what I needed. So I remember coming back and I
Wow.
had really severe anxiety. I was coming back to the workplace and I remember them giving a spreadsheet. And I was a HR business partner. I was, and I'm very, I'm not much of a gloater, but I'm a smart person, right? Like I'm
You're
smart. I know what I'm
accomplished, very
doing. Yeah.
accomplished. Yeah.
And so I came back into the workplace. I remember so specifically, they gave me this spreadsheet to highlight cells in, like when I had noticed something in the spreadsheet that was whatever I was trying to highlight. So like if someone X highlight that cell, they were trying to give
Okay.
me a task that was low demand, like low cognitive demand. But all that did was make me sit
Mm.
there, my brain going 1,000 miles an hour about all the things I was
Mm-hmm.
anxious about while I clicked these cells, which was so below my brain level and my pay grade and everything like that. But not once did anyone really ask, what do you need? And what do you want to do? And how do you want to do it?
Mm.
And so when I say be curious, I think we can't make it, like you said, I think it's about not making assumptions. But to not make
Yeah.
an assumption, we have to be able to understand. And to be able to understand, we have to be able to be courageous enough to ask questions that maybe we shy away from. Like, what's it like to have anxiety, have depression? I had one person who said, I don't know what it's like to have depression. Do you mind, if you feel comfortable to, do you mind
Mm.
sharing more so I can understand? And it wasn't,
Mm.
and it's the way you say it. If they said, oh, what's depression? Can you just tell me what it's more about? Like, of course not. That's a very different way. Or if someone's like, poking their head in, then obviously you can tell the difference between prying and
Mm.
respectively being curious. And I think if you're respectfully curious and try to genuinely understand someone's experience, that lived experience person can say, no, I don't want to share. And that
Mm.
leader or that person can say, that's okay. And
Yeah.
that's the difference between respectful curiosity is asking the question to understand, to be too inclusive, and to
Mm.
respect when they don't want to go there, versus
Mm.
prying, which is asking questions that you don't actually need to know the answers to, and B, not being willing to listen to the person when they say, actually, I don't really feel comfortable sharing that, and then pushing further and saying, no, we must have it. So that's like the two, for
Yeah.
me, that's the difference between the two, which I think it's really important when it comes
I
to
think that's
mental health
beautiful.
and lived experience.
I want to check that I've understood. Can I
Yeah.
frame this up and spit it
Yeah, of
back? And I
course.
want you to correct me if
Yeah.
there's, or let's like evolve this. So, because I also want to add something. What I'm hearing you say is that courageous curiosity that leads with human-centered change, which is what we're
Yeah.
looking for, and inclusive design for solutions, is I'm going to ask the person with lived experience if they feel open to sharing, and I'm going to add the so what or why aspect. And so the
Yeah.
so what is so I can understand,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to I'm going to ask the person for their lived experience so I can go and create a box over there that makes
Yeah.
assumptions and not report back to the person with lived experience on what I'm going to do with their personal private information.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, that's the difference. But I'm wondering if that's the same for you, or if I've missed something.
Yeah, well, I do think context is extremely important in this. So I probably should have put a
Mm,
little asterisk to all of this. Is that if I was a stranger going up to you and I did some respectful curiosity, the person lived
mm,
experience was sitting there going, "Sorry, what? Why do you want to know? Like,
yeah.
what is the purpose of this conversation?" So I think it's really important to be bearing in mind that if someone comes to you, there's lots of different things to keep in mind. If someone come to you to share with that you and
Mm,
you're there responding, are you going out of your way to ask if they're okay? Do you have an existing relationship? Are you a mental health first
mm,
aider at the workplace or a peer supporter at the workplace and you're just going up to someone? Is there any existing relationship that's already there? I do think you have to be
mm,
you have to engage your emotional intelligence to not vibe the relationship. You have to kind of be there and to read the room, right? So I don't
mm.
think you can always go in there and ask questions. And I just think sometimes we jump over questions we were too scared to ask. We make the assumptions, and then the person's experience is almost like, well, you didn't actually ask me what I needed and wanted and what could be benefit I could benefit from. And therefore everyone's experience has been bad because I've not got better and I've not felt good as a result as the lived experience person. The manager, leader, HR person, whatever it is, says I didn't do a good enough job because the thing I've tried to do to help hasn't worked and I've just failed at this and I don't want to have a conversation ever again because now I'm just bad at it, which a lot of leaders say, I'm just bad at it. I'm like, you're not bad at it. It's just, again, you have to
It's a
get comfortable with
practice.
discomfort. Yeah, like you have
Yeah.
to be okay with the fact that these are difficult conversations. Difficult implies uncomfortable.
Mm,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, so I think context is really important just to acknowledge in all of this as well, is that you've got to read the room, you've got to build that kind of tap into your emotional intelligence and try to read someone's body language. What are they sharing? They're not actually verbally saying. Tone, space, privacy. Like there is a lot of other considerations. This is why training is always critical because it isn't
Absolutely.
just, if it was just a 5 minute guidance, then great, tick, we're done. But this is
Mm,
why it's so important to have these, courageous conversation training programs to go, how do we actually do it? And how is it nuanced? How is it individualized? Because if I try and use a cookie cutter approach to every conversation, I'm probably going to upset someone. Well, not upset someone, but I'm probably not going to
I'm
get
going to
it.
miss the mark.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
love that. Love that. I'm
Yeah.
going to miss the mark. Yeah.
I'm going to miss the mark. And that is so important for two reasons. One, obviously, we now in Australia in particular have psychosocial safety legislation.
Mm,
So we have to identify hazards. We have to
yeah.
demonstrate that we're responding. Like that's just law, right?
Mm,
But it's important from an ROI perspective. Because if we're not
yeah.
sitting down and having these conversations to understand how we can get our people to be at their best and to perform at their best and show up to work with that excitement and that
Yeah.
enthusiasm because they want to contribute, like you've shared, you wanted to contribute at that high level, then we're missing out.
Yeah.
So that, that's for me, that's the double thought.
Oh, 100%.
I want to I know that everybody's going to say, how do I get more of Camille? So we're going to share in a minute how people can reach out and learn more with you. But before we do, are you ready for a quick fire round?
Yeah. Let's
Good.
hit.
Okay. In this series, I'm asking all of my guests the same question. The first one, and it's whatever comes to your mind, by the way, I'm going to give no hints,
Okay.
is what comes to mind when you think of somebody who has an impact mindset?
Someone who thinks about what is this going to do and how is this going to impact someone or something before they necessarily think about how, what, all the other like logistical things. So it's more about the why.
Beautiful. I like that. What about inclusive impact? What do those words mean to you?
Including the people who are going to be impacted by the thing that you're doing or the thing you're creating and including them in the process.
Yeah, I like that. It's not just about asking the question and dashing off. It's about that
Co-design.
inclusive design and
Yeah.
co-design. Beautiful. When you see what's happening in workplaces, who are the leaders that are standing out to you? And you don't need to name them, but what are some of the
Mm,
qualities that you've seen and you admire and you want more of?
I think willing to be uncomfortable. I mean, I've said this a lot, these themes, but leaders who are willing to be uncomfortable because being uncomfortable usually means we're doing something we're not usually confident in. And sometimes in mental health, it usually is not areas. It's the technical leaders. These usually who I'm working with are people who specialize in lots of other areas and they're not experts in mental health. So they're willing to be uncomfortable. They're willing to be curious, and they're actually just willing to be kind and seeing that as a powerful part of being a good leader and not seeing it as a weakness or something to be different to achieving to a business outcome. I think you can be all those things I just mentioned and actually get better business outcomes because of it, because you've cared about your people in the process.
Absolutely. Books, podcasts, resources you wish your leaders had read that you now want others to read to be better at work or in the community or in school, wherever.
I don't know about leaders. I'm a book fiend. I love books. I've read so many books, so I could probably, after this podcast, come up with 1,000 books I love. But I think the most impactful book I've ever read, and it's not about workplace, it's actually not about leadership. It's called Lost Connections by Johan Hari, if you've read it.
Oh,
it is to die
magnificent.
for. It is just, he's like, so I'm a writer and I love writing, and my future, I love to write a book like that. It was just, every human being needs to read that book. It's brilliant.
For those who haven't read it, what would the quick synopsis be? What's the call to action?
That beyond everything else, as the name implies, connection is key.
Beautiful. Last one for you. What does it mean to live a meaningful life?
To do things that bring you joy and not do things because you feel like you should or you have to, and you have to do that. Sometimes you just do have to do those little things, or you have to or you should. But I think beyond that, having opportunity to ask yourself, am I doing things that make me joyful? And am I happy in the process?
Thank you so much. Where can everybody find you? Because I know they're going to want to. How do we connect?
LinkedIn is usually the best way of finding me, Camille Davey, or you can go to my website for Grow Together Now.
Camille, I adore you. I'm so excited to bring your voice and your story to our listeners. Thank you for gifting us your time and your wisdom.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm going to let you go with love, and
Thanks,
we'll catch up very soon. Keep up the good impact. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Classroom 5.0. If this episode sparked an insight for you, why not share it with a friend who might benefit too? Or spread the word by leaving your rating and review. I read every single one, and I promise your interest in impact means the world. Classroom 5.0 is brought to you by the Posify Group, a psychology coaching and consulting company specializing in neurodiversity and purpose-driven leadership, equipping today and tomorrow's leaders with the future skills and mindsets needed to thrive and create impact. To learn more about our work and to access today's show notes, links, and more episodes just like these, you can visit www.theposifygroup.com.au/podcast. I'll see you next time.